My name is Oakley Turner. I'm 34 years old, and for most of the past 3 years, I've lived with an odd, persistent feeling, one that crept into my life so quietly that I didn't recognize it until it had already taken root. I was the third wheel in my own relationship, not in subtle ways, not the kind you could dismiss with a laugh or a shrug. No. This was the kind that changes the temperature in a room, that whispers in your ear during the quietest moments. You don't belong here as much as she does. She, in this case, is Laura Hartley, my boyfriend Ethan's best friend since college. Beautiful, charismatic, aggressively self-assured, Laura walked through life as if the world were a stage she was destined to own. And Ethan? He followed her spotlight like a helpless understudy, ready to applaud her every line. Their legendary friendship, as Ethan proudly called it, was more like a two-person echo chamber, filling itself with admiration, inside jokes, and the kind of emotional loyalty normally reserved for lifelong partners, not platonic friends. And then there was me, orbiting them both like some polite, invisible moon. From the day Ethan and I moved in together, Laura had a key to our apartment. For emergencies, he said, but I quickly learned that emergencies included everything from needing to borrow a sweater to feeling bored on a Saturday morning. There were times she'd stroll inside without knocking, tracking her presence through our entryway like a privileged gust of perfume and entitlement. The day she walked in while I was stepping out of the shower, wrapped in nothing but a towel, wet footprints still marking my path, she blinked at me with mild annoyance, as if I was the one intruding in her home. "Oh, didn't know you were here," she said. I stared at her, dripping and mortified. "I live here," I said. She just shrugged and wandered into the kitchen. Ethan laughed when I told him, "Laura doesn't mean anything by it. She's just comfortable around us." Comfortable around us. What a diplomatic way of saying, she doesn't recognize your boundaries, and I don't care enough to enforce them. But that moment was nothing compared to what happened last summer, the night I became the unwilling keeper of a secret that would eventually burn everything down. It was supposed to be a simple night out. Girls' night, Ethan had insisted. He wanted Laura and me to bond, as if forced proximity would magically turn disdain into friendship. So I went. I tried. I sat through overpriced cocktails and Laura's monologues about her brilliance at work, and her brilliance among friends, and her brilliance in general. By the third drink, another one I somehow ended up paying for, Laura leaned forward, eyes glossy with alcohol and ego. "You know what the funniest part is?" she whispered, tapping my wrist as if we'd shared a private joke. "Everyone thinks Mason and I are perfect, the golden couple." She giggled, a mean, careless sound. "But last summer, I had the best affair of my life." My stomach dropped. She spilled everything, names, hotels, lies she'd told, the thrill she felt sneaking around behind her husband's back. She didn't confess like someone ashamed. She bragged like someone proud of a conquest. She thought I was safe, harmless, Ethan's quiet girlfriend, a decorative plant. The next morning, she called me in a panic, hungover terror shaking her voice. She begged me not to repeat anything, pleaded. I agreed. Not because I cared about protecting her, but because I believed in a kind of moral equilibrium. A quiet Cold War where secrets were keys, only to be turned if absolutely necessary. I didn't know the door would present itself less than a year later. The spark that lit the fuse was tiny, insignificant on the surface. All I did was ask Laura to text before coming over. That was it. Just a polite, reasonable request from someone tired of being walked in on half-dressed. But apparently, it was a crime of biblical proportions. The fallout began immediately. Laura told Ethan she felt rejected, that I was making her feel unwelcome in his life, in our home. She said she felt judged. She said she didn't feel safe expressing herself. And Ethan, predictably, took her side. That night, they sat me down on the couch with all the self-righteous seriousness of a board meeting, deciding my employment status. Laura folded her arms. Ethan took her lead. They stared at me like I was a problem to solve. "Oakley," Ethan said, "you really hurt Laura's feelings." "Hurt her feelings?" I repeated, hoping, foolishly, that I'd misheard. "I was in tears," Laura declared, her voice trembling with theatrical fragility. "I've never felt so excluded." Excluded. From my home, where she routinely entered without knocking. I looked at Ethan, waiting for even a flicker of fairness, but his eyes were full of disappointment. At me. "You owe her an apology," he said. Laura nodded, tilting her chin upward as if granting me the privilege of making amends. A slow throb of disbelief pulsed through my chest. Then something colder settled beneath it, something like clarity. Fine, I said. I'll apologize. But Ethan wasn't satisfied. A real apology, he insisted. A sincere one. I nodded again. Then Lara added the final twist, one so absurd it nearly made me laugh. Not here, she said. You should do it in my home, with Mason there, so he knows you understand our bond and respect it. I felt something shift inside me, like a click. The door had opened. The key was in my hands. They wanted a stage, they wanted an audience, they wanted me on my knees in front of Lara's husband. So be it. Okay, I said softly, lowering my eyes, just enough for them to believe they'd broken me. I'll apologize. It's the right thing to do. Ethan looked relieved. Lara smirked, smug and victorious. They thought they were witnessing my surrender, but in truth, they had just written the opening line of their own downfall. With a steadying breath, I stood, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. My reflection glimmered against the surface, calm, composed, unrecognizable. For the first time in a long time, I felt something close to power, and I knew exactly how I would use it. The intervention didn't end with that conversation on the couch. If anything, that was just the dress rehearsal. The next 2 days felt like a twisted training montage, except instead of preparing me for a promotion or a marathon, Ethan and Lara were preparing me to debase myself for their comfort. Ethan took charge of my apology curriculum. We were in the kitchen the next morning, sunlight spilling across the counter while he leaned against it, arms crossed, reciting lines like a director coaching an underperforming actor. Start by acknowledging that you were insecure, he said. You know, something like, Lara, I let my jealousy get the better of me. That shows self-awareness. Self-awareness, right. And then, I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Then you talk about how important she is to us, he went on. Like, you've always been such a supportive presence in our relationship, and I haven't always appreciated that. I took a slow breath. Supportive, I repeated. Lara, who had dropped by uninvited, because of course she had, leaned against the doorway like she owned the scene. It's not about humiliating you, Oakley, she said in a tone that made it absolutely clear that humiliating me was exactly what this was about. It's about honesty. I just need to hear that you understand how much our friendship means. To Ethan, to me, to us. Us. I wondered, not for the first time, when exactly us had stopped meaning me and my boyfriend, and started meaning him and his best friend, with me as the tolerated third. Lara's always been there for me, Ethan added, glancing at her with that soft, admiring smile that used to be mine. She helped me through college, my first job, my panic attacks. You know that. I do, I said. And I did. I also knew she'd mocked him behind his back when he'd struggled, but Ethan never heard those parts. She edited herself for his benefit, saving the uglier lines for people she considered safe and lower than her, like me. We're going to do this right, Lara said briskly. No half-hearted mumbles. You'll come over Saturday night. Mason will be there. I want everything out in the open. No weird tension going forward. I looked at her, at Ethan, at the crooked little triangle we'd all been living in without admitting it. Saturday, Lara's house, their chosen audience. They thought they'd built a stage where I would bow. What they'd actually built was a gallows. And then they'd handed me the rope. That night, when the apartment finally fell quiet, Ethan in the shower, Lara blessedly not walking through our front door, I sat at the small dining table and unlocked my phone. I scrolled up, back to last summer, back to the drunken voice notes, back to the messages that followed the confession. There it was, her first text, the morning after she'd bragged to me about her affair and then sobered up into terror. Oakley, I'm serious, you can't tell anyone, please. Not Mason, not Ethan, no one. My reply, written in a moment of cold detachment, I won't say anything, but don't ever put me in this position again. Her response? You're a lifesaver. I swear it's over. Just pretend I never said anything. The words glowed on the screen. My thumb hovered for a long moment. All it would take was one screenshot. One moment of carving the truth into digital stone. I took the screenshot, not because I planned to use it as a weapon, because I wanted the truth to exist somewhere outside my memory. Then, feeling an unsettling calm, I set my phone down and listened to the water running in the bathroom. Ethan singing softly off key. The man who loved me, but couldn't see how far he'd drifted. It hit me, suddenly and sharply. If I went through with this apology exactly the way they wanted, something inside me would snap and never grow back. If I bowed now, I would be bowing forever. So I made a decision. I wouldn't shout, I wouldn't plead, I wouldn't even argue. I would simply tell the truth. Once, cleanly, in the theater they'd chosen. Whatever burned afterward was never really mine to save. On Friday, the day before the planned spectacle, Ethan appeared behind me as I was making coffee, draping his arms over my shoulders and kissing my cheek. "You okay?" he asked. "Sure," I said. "You've been quiet." "I'm thinking about what to say," I answered, which was true. He smiled, relieved. "That means a lot to me, you know, that you're willing to do this." "I know," I said softly. "It means a lot to me, too." He couldn't hear the second sentence echoing silently behind it. "Just not in the way you think." That afternoon, Laura called to check in. "Don't overthink it," she advised, her voice dripping with false comfort. "Just be honest about your issues. You're not a bad person, Oakley. You're just territorial. Ethan's important to you, and you felt threatened. It's human." "Territorial, like a dog." I let her talk. I had no interest in defending myself to someone who had cheated on her husband and still believed she occupied the moral high ground. "The main thing," she concluded, "is that Mason hears you. I don't want him thinking you dislike me. That would be complicated." Complicated. Interesting word choice, coming from someone who'd spent a summer living a double life. After the call, I stared at my reflection in the blank TV screen. Who was I? This woman quietly arranging the chairs before a storm? The version of me who swallowed everything to keep the peace? Or someone else entirely, finally waking up? Saturday morning, I woke earlier than usual. Ethan was still asleep, one arm thrown across the bed, his face soft and untroubled. I watched him for a moment, a dull ache forming beneath my ribs. I did love him. That was the cruelest part. I loved him, but I could no longer unsee the way he'd chosen Lara over me again and again, not just in arguments, but in the quiet validations that matter more than words. I went to the kitchen, made coffee, sat at the table, and opened my phone. There was one last thing I needed to do. I scrolled to Mason Hartley in my contacts. We weren't close, but we were cordial. Shared dinners, birthday gatherings, joint holidays. He struck me as the kind of man who loved steady routines, quiet evenings, his wife's laughter. He also struck me as the kind of man who had no idea who his wife really was. My thumb hovered over the call button. This is it, I thought. This is the moment where this becomes real. I pressed it. The line rang twice before a warm, slightly groggy voice picked up. "Hey, Oakley, everything all right?" Mason asked. "Hi, Mason," I replied, injecting my voice with friendly calm. "Yeah, everything's fine. Just wanted to confirm about tonight. 7 still good?" "Yeah, of course," he said, sounding pleased. "Lara told me you guys wanted to come over and clear the air. I think that's a great idea. I know things have been a little tense." I closed my eyes briefly. "It means a lot that you're willing to have us," I said. "I really want us all to be on the same page. One big, honest group. No weird undercurrents." "Same here," he replied. "See you at 7. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, the phone still in my hand. My audience was confirmed. The stage was set. Ethan spent the afternoon fussing over what I would wear, as if my outfit might affect the sincerity of my humiliation. "Not black," he said, sorting through my closet. "That's too harsh. Something softer. Maybe the blue dress? You look approachable in that one." Approachable. I picked the blue dress. Let him think he was directing this scene. Let Lara think she was producing it. Let them both believe they were about to watch me perform repentance. Underneath the dress, beneath the nerves, beneath the shaky breaths, there was a small, sharp core of steel forming. By the time we stepped out of the apartment and headed toward the car, Ethan's hand warm around mine, my heart wasn't racing anymore. It was steady. We drove in near silence, the city sliding past the windows. Streetlights flickered on, bathing everything in a dim, anticipatory glow. "You're doing the right thing," Ethan said as we pulled up to Lara and Mason's house. For once I agreed with him. Just not for the reasons he thought. When Lara opened the door, she was glowing with satisfaction, dressed beautifully, makeup perfect, smile wide. Mason appeared beside her, calm and welcoming. "Come in," she said. "Let's fix this." I stepped over the threshold and felt it like a line being crossed. Whatever happened tonight, there was no going back. Lara and Mason's house had always reminded me of a showroom. Immaculate, tasteful, curated to project a happiness that suddenly felt artificial under the weight of what I knew. The air inside held the faint scent of citrus cleaner and lavender candles, but beneath it, I sensed something else. A quiet tremor. A note of tension waiting for the right frequency to shatter. Ethan and I stepped into the living room, and Mason smiled warmly as he offered us drinks. He had no idea he was minutes away from watching his life split straight down the middle. Let's all sit, Lara said, her voice soft and gracious, the queen welcoming her subjects. Ethan placed a gentle hand on my back, guiding me toward the sofa like a sacrificial offering. He was nervous, but excited. He believed this was the night his girlfriend finally learned her place in their little hierarchy. We all sat. Lara crossed her legs, spine straight, eyes gleaming with triumph, barely hidden beneath false gentleness. Ethan looked at me, gave a small nod, the cue for my performance. I rose slowly, smoothing my dress, inhaling the thick silence that had settled across the room. 4 pairs of eyes followed me as I walked to the center of the rug, near the fireplace. The flames cast long shadows behind me, making the moment feel strangely theatrical. Good. A stage deserved lighting. I turned first to Ethan, then to Lara, then to Mason, letting the gravity of the moment steep into each breath. Thank you all for being here, I began, my voice soft and steady with rehearsed sincerity. We're here because I owe someone in this room an apology. Ethan straightened proudly. Lara's smile widened. Mason watched politely, unaware of the shifting tectonic plates beneath his feet. I haven't always appreciated the closeness between Ethan and Lara, I continued, and I understand now that my reactions made someone feel judged and unwelcome. Lara tilted her chin, glowing. Ethan beamed at her like a student pleased that his teacher approved. I let them have that moment, one final taste of their delusion. And for that, I said, turning slowly, I am truly sorry. I took a breath, a deliberate, theatrical inhale. Then, as every eye followed me in expectation, I did something none of them anticipated. I lowered myself onto one knee. Ethan's breath caught. Lara actually gasped, her hand flying to her chest. A thrill of victory flickered across her face, the moment she believed she had finally broken me. But I wasn't looking at her. I lifted my head and met Mason Hartley's eyes. He frowned in confusion. Oakley, why are you— My apology, I said softly, is actually to you. Lara's smile snapped out like a light bulb exploding. Ethan blinked, stunned. To Mason? I nodded, my voice quiet but carrying like a blade through silk. Yes, to Mason, because the truth is, the biggest wrong I've committed in this room was keeping a secret from him. Mason's expression froze. Lara's chest rose sharply. Ethan shifted forward, nerves flickering through his face. What secret? Mason asked. I held his gaze, not pitying, not triumphant, just delivering something inevitable. I'm sorry, Mason, I said. I'm sorry I didn't tell you about the affair Lara had last summer. The room didn't just fall silent, it dropped into a void. The air stilled, the candles flickered. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked loud enough to echo. Mason's face drained of color, his breath stalling mid-inhale. Ethan's mouth fell open. Lara lurched to her feet. What? She shrieked. Oakley, what the hell are you doing? But I didn't look at her. I stayed kneeling, steady, unbroken. Mason deserves the truth, I continued calmly. I should never have protected her at your expense. That's my failure. That's why I'm apologizing. You're lying, Lara screamed, pointing at me with shaking hands. This is revenge. This is punishment because I asked you to show some respect. Lara, Mason whispered, his voice splintering, tell me she's lying. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Nothing but panic. You see? Ethan tried to intervene, voice trembling. Oakley, this is crazy. You can't just— I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. Suddenly, you could hear every shift of fabric, every breath, every heartbeat. I tapped a screenshot and held it out to Mason. This, I said, is from the morning after she told me everything. He took the phone with shaking hands. On the screen, me. I won't say anything about what you told me about the affair, but don't ever put me in that position again. Lara, you're a lifesaver. I swear it's over. Just pretend I never said anything. The blood drained from Mason's face so fast I feared he might faint. Lara collapsed onto the armchair as though her bones had liquefied. That's not— It wasn't— she stammered, voice strangled. Ethan stared at the screen, horror dawning in his eyes. Not just at the betrayal, but at his own blindness. The woman he defended above all else had made a fool of him too. I rose finally, my knees cracking softly against the hardwood floor. I smoothed my dress, gathered my purse, and looked at the wreckage collapsing in real time. Lara trembling and choking on denials. Mason crumpling inward as the truth shattered through him. Ethan frozen, guilt and disbelief tearing through his face. My voice was quiet when I broke the silence. My apology, I said, has been delivered. And then I turned, walked to the door, and stepped outside. I didn't slam it. I didn't rush. I simply closed it behind me, sealing them inside the explosion I had left burning. The night air was cold, crisp, almost cleansing. For a moment, I stood on the porch, breathing deeply. It was over. The truth was free, and none of us would ever be the same again. When I stepped out of Lara and Mason's house that night, the air felt different. Sharp, electric, almost metallic. I knew what I had detonated inside those walls, but knowing it and witnessing the aftermath were two different things entirely. I didn't wait for Ethan. I didn't look back. I just walked to the car, unlocked it, and slid into the driver's seat. I sat there in silence for maybe 30 seconds before Ethan burst out of the house, calling my name like a man chasing a departing train. Oakley, Oakley, wait! He pulled open the passenger door, breathless, his face twisted in panic and disbelief. What the hell was that? He demanded, voice cracking. Why would you do that? Why would you ruin everything? I kept my hands on the steering wheel. I told the truth, I said simply. That wasn't the truth, he snapped. That was vindictive. That was insane. I turned my head and looked at him in a way I never had before. Detached, steady, no longer fighting for his understanding. You think Lara didn't have an affair? Ethan froze. Something flickered in his eyes. Something small and terrified. Doubt. A memory. A suspicion he'd buried because believing the lie was easier. I don't know, he said weakly. It's not my place to judge her marriage. That's exactly the problem, I said quietly. Nothing is ever your place when it comes to Lara. You defend her blindly, even against evidence, even against reality, even against me. His mouth opened and closed helplessly. Oakley, you blindsided all of us. You could have at least told me beforehand. I shook my head. You would have stopped me. I would have tried, he admitted. There it was, the last truth between us. I started the engine. He flinched at the sound, as if the ignition itself were an indictment. We'll talk at home, he said, gripping the doorframe. We need to talk. But we didn't. Not that night. Not the next. Not in a way that mattered. When we got home, I locked myself in the bedroom. He slept on the couch, surrounded by the silence he had helped create. The first wave of fallout arrived before sunrise. My phone buzzed relentlessly. Texts from Ethan's friends, from Lara's circle, from numbers I didn't recognize. What you did was disgusting. How could you lie like that? You need help, Oakley. Seriously. You're jealous, unstable, and toxic. Lara never deserved this. I didn't reply. I simply forwarded each one a single image, the screenshot of Lara's confession and cover-up. No explanation, no commentary, just truth laid bare. One by one, the messages stopped. Silence replaced outrage. Truth is an excellent tranquilizer. By mid-morning, Ethan was sending emails, because I had blocked his number. The first email was denial. Oakley, I don't know what's gotten into you, but you have to tell Mason it was a lie. You misunderstood something. This is insane. I didn't reply. 2 hours later, another email. Anger this time. You humiliated Lara in front of her husband. You made me look like a fool. I don't even recognize you right now. I didn't reply to that either. By afternoon, he had reached bargaining. Okay. Maybe Lara said something stupid while she was drunk. Maybe you misunderstood. Maybe it wasn't what you think. If you just explain to Mason that it was exaggerated, we can fix this, please. Still, I said nothing. That night, around 1 a.m., came the fourth email. Depression. I feel sick. I don't know what to do. Everything's falling apart. Please talk to me. I miss you, I closed the email without responding. He needed to sit in his silence. The message that mattered came the next afternoon. From Clara in the original story, now, here, it was Mason. My phone buzzed with an unfamiliar, trembling calm. Oakley, I don't know if I should thank you or hate you, but you told me the truth. That's more than Lara has done in a year. I found the statements, the credit card, the hotel charges. It's all real. She left last night. I asked her to. I'm meeting a lawyer tomorrow. I exhaled, slowly, meaningfully. Truth doesn't always heal, but it clarifies. And clarity, painful as it is freedom. Ethan tried to talk to me again that night, pacing the living room with frantic steps. We can get through this, he insisted. I just need you to admit you went too far, that's all. Just admit it. I didn't go too far, I murmured from the doorway. I went far enough. He looked at me like he finally, belatedly realized he'd lost something precious. The saddest part was, he didn't even understand what it was. The next morning, I emailed my lawyer. The apartment lease was in my name alone. I wanted the process clean, official, undeniable. Ethan Hartley, this notice serves as formal eviction. You have 30 days. When he received the letter, he stormed into the bedroom, face red, eyes wild. "You're kicking me out?" "You don't live here," I said softly. "You just occupy space." "That's not fair." "It's accurate." He broke then. Completely. Every ounce of bravado evaporated, leaving only a man who had spent years defending the wrong person and was now scrambling to rebuild a life without the scaffolding she had provided. He didn't apologize. Not for how he treated me. Not for letting Laura walk all over us. Not for choosing her every single time. He simply looked tired, exhausted, defeated. The way a person looks when they finally face the mirror without the lighting they've always relied on. The weeks that followed were chaos with quiet edges. Ethan lingered, sulking, playing loud music, leaving passive-aggressive notes. He was petty. He was childish. He was unraveling. I ignored it all. Truth had already done the work. And when Ethan's final day came, he tried one last pathetic stunt, loading my expensive television and sound system into his car. When I caught him, he froze like a guilty teenager. "That's not yours," I said calmly. "I paid for half—" "No," I interrupted. "You didn't, and I have the statements to prove it." He deflated, the last bit of fight leaving him. He put everything back. The next morning he left, and for the first time in years, my home was quiet. Truly quiet. Not lonely, not empty. Just mine. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, breathing in a new kind of air, one not polluted by excuses, triangulations, or someone else's shadow. I thought I would feel wrecked. I thought I would feel guilty. Instead, I felt something startling, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. Silence is an interesting thing. When Ethan finally left the apartment for good, silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The first morning alone, I woke up to a space that was still. No slammed cabinets, no reheated arguments from the night before, no doorbell announcing Laura's uninvited arrival, just sunlight drifting across clean floors and the faint hum of the refrigerator, a sound I hadn't properly heard in years because of all the emotional noise drowning it out. I made coffee, sat on the couch, and listened to my own breathing. It wasn't lonely, it was mine. But outside my front door, the fires I had ignited were still burning. Laura's collapse was immediate. Mason didn't waste time. With the proof I had provided and the additional evidence he found, he confronted her. According to a mutual friend, the argument could be heard from the driveway. When Mason asked her if she had anything to say for herself, all she offered were frantic half-lies. "It didn't mean anything. It was just a phase. I was stressed. It wasn't even an affair. It was a mistake." But Mason had changed in that moment. Something inside him cracked and then hardened. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't even angry. He was devastated and resolute. He asked her to leave. She did. Not because she respected him, but because she knew staying would mean facing a truth she didn't have the spine to confront. Within a week, Mason met with his lawyer, and within another week, Laura's social circle began to shift. People who once praised her brilliance now whispered about her deceit. People who admired her charisma started avoiding her at gatherings. People who called her the glue of the group now treated her like a solvent that dissolved everything it touched. Reputation isn't built on perfection. It's built on consistency. Laura had been consistently self-serving for years. The affair just exposed it publicly. She couldn't spin this. She couldn't charm her way out. She couldn't cry convincingly enough to soften the truth. Her empire of admiration collapsed in 1 month. And she hated me for it. But the truth was, I hadn't destroyed her life. She had. I just turned on the lights. Ethan's collapse was slower, sadder, and somehow more inevitable. He tried to rebuild his life the way he rebuilt arguments, by leaning on Laura. But she wasn't available. She was too busy drowning in the consequences of her own choices. And Ethan, stripped of his 2 favorite emotional crutches, Laura's validation and my stability, found himself floundering. Mutual friends stopped responding to him. He withdrew from work. He started posting vague, sad quotes on social media. Once, a friend sent me a screenshot of a post he made at 2 a.m. "Sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who hurt you the deepest." He didn't specify which of us he meant, but either way, the irony was staggering. He wasn't a bad man, he was just a weak one, and weakness paired with blindness becomes its own kind of cruelty. Laura had used him for years, emotionally and socially. He just never recognized it because he believed loyalty meant never questioning someone, even when they deserved to be questioned most. Now, without her pedestal, Ethan had nowhere to stand. He made a few attempts to talk to me, long emails, rambling voice messages, even a handwritten letter left under my door. But I didn't respond. Not out of spite, but because I was done living in the emotional echo of someone else's decisions. The day he finally moved the last box from the apartment, he looked at me with eyes full of something like regret. Not apology, not accountability, just regret. The regret of someone who realized he'd misread the story he was living in. I nodded to him. He nodded back. And that was the end. As for Mason, he surprised me. I hadn't expected anything from him. Not gratitude, not conversation, certainly not connection. I had dropped a bomb into his life. Even if that bomb was necessary, I assumed he would want as much distance from me as possible. But 2 weeks after the confrontation, he emailed me. Oakley, I hope you're doing all right. Thank you for telling me the truth, even though it hurt. I'm not okay yet, but I'm becoming okay. If you ever want to talk or just need company, I'm around. Mason. I didn't reply immediately. I wasn't sure if I should. But the next week, after another quiet morning in my peaceful apartment, I found myself writing back. Coffee turned into conversation. Conversation turned into understanding. Understanding turned into something gentle, softer than romance, and more honest than sympathy. We weren't healing each other. We were healing alongside each other. One afternoon, he said something that stayed with me. You didn't ruin my marriage. You ended the part of my life where I allowed myself to be lied to. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. And clarity is the most intimate thing of all. Meanwhile, Laura and Ethan tried to salvage their friendship. It didn't work. Ethan blamed her for using him. Laura blamed him for not defending her harder. Without me to be their common enemy, they turned on each other like snakes that suddenly realized the warmth they relied on wasn't mutual. Their legendary friendship didn't just fracture, it vanished. The last update I heard was that Laura was living in a rented studio apartment and avoiding mutual friends. Ethan had moved in with a coworker temporarily while trying to rebuild his finances. Both of them had spent years shaping their identities around being admired. Now, neither had anyone left to admire them. And me? I reclaimed my space. I changed the locks, rearranged the furniture, repainted the bedroom a soft slate blue, bought new curtains, donated clothes that reminded me of who I was in that relationship. The apartment felt like a new beginning rather than a graveyard. Some nights, I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine, listening to the city breathe, thinking about everything I had walked through and everything I had refused to keep carrying. I didn't feel vindictive. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. The fire had burned down what needed to go, but what remained was mine. 6 months after the night everything detonated, I woke up to a version of my life I never imagined I'd have. Not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. Honest in a way that felt new, startling, and beautifully unpolished. No more walking on emotional eggshells. No more pretending I wasn't bothered. No more being the quiet shadow orbiting someone else's spotlight. For the first time in years, I was living in a space that reflected me. The apartment was different now. Warmer. Calmer. The kind of calm that doesn't feel like a pause before the next storm, but like a sanctuary that doesn't owe an apology to anyone. I changed the lock the day after Ethan left, a symbolic act of reclaiming my boundaries. I didn't realize how heavy the old key had felt in my hand until the new one clicked into place with a light metallic snap. Sometimes freedom sounds like that. The world that once revolved around Ethan and Laura's gravitational pull had long collapsed. Their orbits no longer touched mine, or each other's. Laura, last I heard, was living in a small, rented apartment across town. She no longer had the effortless social empire she used to flaunt. People avoided her now. They didn't hate her. They simply saw her clearly for the first time. There's no recovering grace when your entire persona depended on illusion. Ethan, meanwhile, was a quieter tragedy. The collapse of his friendship with Laura shook him more deeply than our breakup ever did. He had built his emotional world around someone who treated him like a loyal accessory rather than an equal. Losing her forced him into a reckoning he wasn't equipped for. They blamed each other, of course. Two architects of their own destruction arguing over who held the wrong blueprint. Their downfall wasn't satisfying. It wasn't karma with a trumpet fanfare. It was simply sad. Sad because they had chances to change. They just never chose them. My healing didn't come in a dramatic sweep either. It came in quiet rituals. Morning sunlight warming the bedroom walls. Flowers I bought for myself. Journals filled with the truth I'd spent years swallowing. Evenings spent with soft music instead of someone else's chaos. And then there was Mason. What an unexpected presence he became. I didn't reach out to him immediately. After everything, I wanted to make sure my intentions weren't tangled with guilt or escape. But Mason Mason reached out with a kind of gentleness I hadn't experienced in years. Not pity, not an attempt to use me as a rebound, just sincerity, the kind that doesn't demand anything in return. "Thank you again," he had written months ago, "for giving me back the truth, even when I didn't want it." And slowly, quietly, our conversations became part of a new rhythm. We started with emails. Emails became texts. Texts became phone calls that lasted hours. And eventually, those became coffee. Coffee without expectation. Coffee without future promises. Just two people recovering separately, but near each other. One afternoon, sitting across from him at a small cafe, he stirred his drink and said something that settled into my chest like a stone I didn't realize I'd been carrying. "I spent years trying to love Lara the way she needed, but she never once asked what I needed. You didn't owe me anything, Oakley, yet you told me the truth she never would have." I didn't know what to say then. Even now, thinking back, it still softens something inside me. Our connection wasn't built on shared tragedy, but on the clarity that came afterward. The quiet, the honesty, the desire to build something without stepping on broken glass. We weren't rushing. We weren't labeling anything. We were simply happening. Naturally, slowly, real. Maybe that was why it worked. People often say truth sets you free, but what they don't say is that truth also rearranges your life. It knocks down walls you thought were permanent. It changes the people standing beside you. It forces you to face the version of yourself you were too afraid to become. Truth reshaped everything around me and within me. It didn't give me closure in a neat, cinematic sense, but it gave me clarity. Clarity about who I was. Clarity about what I deserved. Clarity about what love should feel like. Not suffocating, not anxiety-ridden, not conditional, but steady and warm. I had spent years walking carefully so Lara wouldn't feel threatened, so Ethan wouldn't feel defensive. I made myself small so others could stay comfortable. But the night I knelt in front of Mason and told the truth, I wasn't just exposing a secret. I was reclaiming my voice. And once reclaimed, I never let it go again. Sometimes, Mason and I walk through the city in comfortable silence. He'll glance at me with that quiet, thoughtful look he has, the one that makes me believe he sees me clearly, without filters or shadows or expectations. One evening, while we were watching the sunset over the waterfront, he said softly, "You didn't just free me, Oakley, you freed yourself." I hadn't thought of it that way, but he was right. The truth freed us both. And whatever comes next, whether it becomes love or remains a steady friendship, it will come from a place of honesty neither of us is willing to compromise. Not anymore. Because once you've walked out of a burning building, you don't go searching for smoke. You choose air, you choose clarity, you choose yourself. And sometimes, when the ashes settle, you find someone else standing beside you, breathing the same clean air. Not as a replacement, not as a rescue, but as a beginning.